he grabbed my hand in church 10 days before their affair started. And our pastor was talking about an upcoming marriage retreat and marriage course and all that. He grabbed my hand, looked down at me, and he says, our marriage is so great, we could teach that course.
Oh.
10 days. And then he entered into an affair.
You were left by God. Well, welcome to See Here Love for our very special summer series, our SOS series, Summer of Strength. And I love this topic. I love that very empowering Summer of Strength. And I am so glad that on today's episode, I have Stephanie Rourke Jackson with me, a life and leadership coach. And we're going to learn a lot from Stephanie, especially in, really tough subject. For some people that I know, they've gone through this journey. For others, they get, broken trust and having to work through restoration and relationship. And so, Stephanie, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, it's not the easiest subject to talk about, but I'm glad we're having this conversation.
And so the subject that we're going to be talking about and I'm going to be listening to is your marriage and infidelity within the marriage and the journey that you and your husband and family really had to go through in restoration and forgiveness and healing. And so I'm glad you're here, Stephanie, because I can't wait for you to give us tools and tips and wisdom on strengthening not only marriages, but how to trust again and how to strengthen those who are really struggling, with trust and forgiveness. So let's start off. Let's just get right to it. Let's start off with your story about how you met your spouse and a little bit about the background of your marriage. Let's start with that first.
Yeah. It's a cute story. It's one of those rom-com type of stories.
I love rom-coms.
We actually grew up across the street from each other. So we both moved into the neighborhood when we were 6. Yet, even though we lived across the street from each other, we both went to different schools and hung out with different friend groups, and didn't actually meet or connect until we were 16, when mutual friends of ours moved in between, and my husband Rob started dating Kaylee. And I started dating her brother, Jason. So we all became, it's like teenagers being friends. Well, when you're a teenager, you just like, hey, if you're not going out, can I go out with her? Can I go out with him? Like, it was a little bit crazy. But anyway, just friends. So we became really good friends at 16 and both dated other people for the next couple of years, but remained good friends and just chatted, having, curbside conversations and hanging out and that sort of thing. And both found ourselves without being in a relationship towards the summer of, now I'll date myself, 1983. And
you're still young. You're still young, Stephanie.
Just before we turned 18. And just, we just went to movies and for pizza and walks in the park, and then discovered that, whoa, I think something shifted here. I think I like him. And he was showing a little bit more affection and held my hand and, all of those little sparkly bits, right? So it was, it became friendship to infatuation to, like, are we going to make this thing real and commit to being boyfriend and girlfriend? And so we did, and we dated for 9.5 years.
Whoa.
Until, I know.
It's
crazy.
Okay. 9.5 years. Now, at this point, are you at one point, are you going, is this actually going to happen? Like, did you doubt at any point in the 9.5 years, like, we're never going to get married? Or that's a long time to be engaged.
That's a long time to date.
No, sorry, date before you got engaged. Right. That is a long time.
No, and you hit the nail on the head, Melinda. We, at that point, we're 24, 25, 26, and we're attending a lot of weddings because our friends are getting engaged and married. And pretty much at every wedding, I'd be bawling my eyes out, and Rob was like, well, "What's wrong? It's not my wedding." You have these silly plans when you're younger, right? I wrote,
Yeah.
"Dear Diary, by the time I'm 25, I want to be married," and blah blah.
Yeah.
All these really fantastical things that seem real, and in all honesty, they're very romantic and unrealistic. But that was the lens through which I hoped my life to be. And so eventually, I just gave him an ultimatum. Like, it's not
Nice.
happening. I'm not getting a great proposal. There was no, big event or surprise or all of these things that you now see on YouTube. That wasn't our experience. We were driving home from somewhere. It was the fall. It was a crappy night, and I again just started crying and said, like, "Hey, this is it. Either we're going to get married and engaged, or I'm moving on." And
Good for you. That's good for you. Seriously, I think at this point I would be doing the same thing. I might not
yeah,
wait 9.5 years, but
yeah, well, right. I mean, we were still kind of young, right? But
right. No, that's true.
but I
True.
had already I had already moved out, and I was ready. Like, I was on my path to my life again. All those things I documented in my diary. I'm a little bit more type A. I'm firstborn. He's fourth born, so he's the last. He's the baby.
Oh,
He's
is a
the only
baby? So
boy.
baby and firstborn. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. Okay.
right. So you can already get
Mm-hmm.
an appreciation of our
Oh,
dynamic. I
yes.
was really used to giving orders, being the eldest of four, and he was the youngest of four. I gave the orders. I wanted things a particular way. I now understand I had control issues, but I wanted things in a certain way, and basically he just kind of took orders, and he was like, "Oh, that's what we're supposed to do," like, as if it just sort of dawned on him, 9.5 years of dating, right? I guess we're supposed to go on from here. I'm supposed to move out of my house, like, still living at his house with his parents. I had moved out. As I said, I was into my career. At the time, my dream was to be in the fashion industry. Went to school for it, graduated, got my dream job like a month later. So
Wow.
I was living, right? And the
Yeah.
only missing piece was the husband, so that we could buy the house, so that we could get on with the rest of the fairy tale. So, yeah, I just like, "Hey, is it ever going to happen?" And he's like, "Okay." And I just sat there and I said, "So yes?" And he's like, "Guess so." Like,
So
kind of
was
like,
that
"Well,
a
what else is
proposal?
there?"
Was that a
Right.
semi proposal ish, or was that the proposal?
Well,
Stephanie.
the next day I booked us into Ashley to register for China, so I took it as a proposal. Isn't that the next thing that you do? Whoop, okay, let's go register for China.
Uh,
The China story.
without a ring, it was kind of like, let's do
Oh yeah,
this
no
and then let's
ring.
register. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no ring. And the funny thing was, so we went, of course, and he's all timid and scared, and like the lights are bothering him, and he's got sensory issues, and he's like, I can't even be in. Why are we even here? I'm like, well, we're picking out China because we're going to get married, and we need people to register, and we want gifts, right? And he sees two ladies from his church, and so he's hiding behind the pool. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, "Oh my gosh, it's so and so and so and so from my church." I'm like, "So?" He goes, "Well, they're going to know." What? But we're engaged. Why would a guy be at Ashley's if you're not engaged? And I'm like, "We could be buying a gift for somebody." And he's like, "Oh," like, and in that moment, honestly, Melinda, I should have thought, this is weird. Like, this is not
Mm,
normal. This is not a typical response to, "Wow, we're gonna, commit and spend the rest of our lives together. And isn't it wonderful? And don't I just want to share this with the world?" And do all the typical normal things,
mm-hmm.
like share it with our family, which we didn't do until December. So this was February, or sorry, this was September, and it took like 3 months literally for him to like actually tell his parents and then my parents. And I'm like, this is weird, but I wanted it so desperately. And this is the thing, I think, when you want something so desperately, you're willing to do everything and anything without using logic, intuition,
Right.
having conversations that are open and honest. So there was a lot now that when I look back, I can see how both of us had different misconceptions, honestly, about life and marriage and relationship and healthy
Mm-hmm.
relationships and transparency. And so there was a lot of things that were sort of hidden and that were secretive from kind of
What
the
would
get-go.
get go? So what would you say then, Stephanie? Like if somebody is listening and going, I want to get married, I'm in the beginning stages. What are some key things now looking back that before you did the car proposal ish, you should have done? You know what I
Ultimatum.
mean? Like it's almost like once you get engaged, Stephanie, it's almost like it's too late. You know, and I remember hearing that from a pastor, like, when I got engaged in my first marriage, I remember talking to a pastor wanting to go for marriage counseling. And he's like, it's kind of too late because you're already engaged. Like, you've kind of made the decision. So
Yeah.
anything now, you're a yes all the way through, and you'll find ways to just make it work because you're engaged. Whereas he's like, I wish I had seen you prior to the engagement so that you could actually have made a decision then without the ring on the finger, right? Without the commitment. So there was some freedom to say, maybe this isn't going to work. You know what I mean? Like, it was a smart
Oh,
pastor. But what would I
100%.
know? And I was like, oh, shoot. But what would you say, in that regard?
Yeah, I would say 100% that, when you are thinking about the rest of your life and making such a large commitment, such as getting engaged to be married, that you actually have those conversations ahead of time. And we really didn't. Like, we really didn't say, hey, where is this leading? We just kind of assumed that
Hmm.
we would be together. But then being brave enough to actually talk about and communicate about what does the next thing look like. Like, are we talking about marriage here? Not being all weirded out by having that conversation, like, the DTR, define the relationship. You
Hmm.
have to be transparent and honest about what you want, what you need, where you want to go. What does your vision for your life look like with and or with your spouse, or without, but just like, what are the things that are really important to you, what are the values that are critical? And we never
Mm-hmm.
had those conversations. And not to say that we were 17 or 18. At this point we were 26. Like, again, we
Yeah.
both were, we had lived some, and we had dated, and we had, we're into careers, and we were adults, like, 25
Mm-hmm.
years to form the brain, but we were already adults, and it was a normal, natural next progression that shouldn't have been awkward and weird to have the conversation. Yet
Mm.
it was. And to your point, we just kind of assumed the next thing. And showing up at Ashley's the next day to get China is ridiculous, honestly. Like, that just shows you
Mm-hmm.
my skewed point of view. It was not clear. I was focused on the wrong things. We should have said,
Yeah.
okay, the next day, like, "Okay, what does this really mean? Like, let's talk to some friends. Let's talk to our pastor. Let's talk to our parents and see what they think." But we didn't. We kept it quiet. We kept it secretive. It was in the dark. So now already there's shame on top of it. It's just a
Mm.
really weird place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which
Wow.
is
So
indicative
you
of many things,
please.
in our own pasts,
Mm-hmm.
of things that we never talked about with each other, that we realized, shame had come into, and we were so embarrassed about certain behaviors and things in our family of origin and things we were
Mm.
exposed to, but we never shared and talked about.
So really what you're saying, Stephanie, I think, as somebody's listening going, I'm starting on that path, I think, the courage and openness and authenticity to share honestly. And if your partner doesn't want to go there or doesn't want to share, that should be a red flag, right? Like, I mean, if you're too
Yeah.
scared to approach your soon to be husband or wife with these issues, first of all. Second of all, if they respond in a way that's either like shuts you down or freaks out or doesn't want to talk about it, that should also be another red flag, right? Because here you are going to share your life with this person for the rest of your life, and if you can't even approach or broach these subjects, and there's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that would be my first tip, is to always feel like you should be able to share anything
Mm,
that is that feels awkward or weird, that you are just unsure about, that you feel there might be some issue with. To be able to have the courage to have that conversation, to talk
mm-hmm.
about the thing that you are either wondering about or you've made an assumption about, but to actually bring it out and say, hey, this is where I'm at, and I'm feeling kind of weird, and this is kind of a hard conversation for me. But, when you didn't do this or you said that, what did you mean by that? Like, where is that coming
Yeah.
from? Should I be concerned about this? Tell me more. It's having the
Mm,
bravery to actually have those kinds of questions and conversations and give each other permission to be honest. Because the other
that's good.
assumption is, if I ask these questions or if I share what's really in my heart, that, my boyfriend or my fiance or my spouse is going to react in a negative way, and I'm going to cause tension and conflict, and it's going to be, it's going to be difficult, and there's going to be anger, or there's going to be disruption, or there's going to be pain and hurt. There might be, and there should be if it's something that's really important, but yet having, again, the permission to be able to feel the ability to trust yourself and your partner enough to say,
Mm-hmm.
this is important, this is how I'm feeling, and this is why we need to talk about it. And if we don't, then we need help.
Yeah, that's so good.
And
Imagine, Stephanie, of all the
oh,
people who did that or were doing that now, what that would mean for marriages. I mean, here's the thing. Some people, if they did that, wouldn't get married to this person. And it would
right.
save a lot of issues down the line. Or this would open up something where, they're starting on a really open, honest, and good place as they go into marriage. And that sets sort of the tone for the rest of their lives together. But, and I'll be honest, like, I think when I think about my first marriage, if we had had those conversations, I'll say this, I don't know if we would have gotten married.
Mm,
If we had had those honest conversations about where we're going, tough stuff that we're dealing with, values, focus, priorities. I don't think, and it's interesting as we're talking about this. What's bringing up to me is like, why was I not wanting to have those conversations? I think this is it, and you're giving me an aha moment. I think it's because I wanted it so badly. I wanted the fairy tale and the marriage so badly that I was willing to overlook very key things in my own life, family of origin stuff, and he was willing to, he was unwilling to look at that as well. And then we didn't want to be honest about those things, and we just wanted to forge ahead and get married and start this life together. And I think it's because I wanted the marriage so badly. I was willing, and this is so sad, I was willing to forego a lot of values and things that I wanted for my life and for my future. And I think for him too. And, it is what it is. I think looking back now, you know, 15 years later, when we were at that point to make that decision, I think I can say that now, and I think this is a good conversation to have as you're saying this, as you're bringing it up. So, wow, that's good. That was good. That was a good moment for me, Stephanie.
okay, yes.
So
Good
so
therapy
you,
session, Belinda.
yeah, exactly.
My coaching work is
Um, so you go forward with the marriage. You haven't had these conversations. We've done our Ashley thing. How long from Ashley, China, to then when you get married?
we got married the next year.
Okay, so the next
Yeah.
year, so you have a
So
year. Okay,
yeah, so it was about 9 months. The engagement was about 9 months,
okay,
and
okay.
it was beautiful. And in all honesty, like, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking, if we had the bravery and the ability and the skills to be able to have those conversations, the really important ones way back then, would we have gotten married? And I think because we both knew each other and the essence of who we truly
Mm,
were, we would still be married. We would still have gone through with the marriage, and we would have, I think, had a a more enjoyable from the get-go marriage that was really based on truth and transparency and intimacy rather than, okay, we're married, so then what's the next thing? And going back to your aha moment, which I love aha moments because they just like phew, like there's a spark,
Yeah.
right? Like aha is A for awareness. Oh, I have awareness with honesty that moves to action. So, you have to do something about now this honest awareness that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it just sits there and it's useless. Um, but we, so we did some marriage counseling, which was a bit of a joke. Our pastor who married us, who's a really dear and great friend of ours, and we love him. But we had been together for so long, so his assumption was, you guys know each other, you'll be fine. Like, if you're still
Mm.
together after 9.5 years, it's great. And so both my husband and our pastor really loved hockey. So really, when we got together for our counseling sessions, it was just them discussing hockey, and I kind of sat there.
Yeah.
And then also, I had the arrogance of thinking, I know this guy so well. I'm making the decisions here. We're going forward. This is my plan. I've got it all laid out. It's going to be fine. Which again, that's part of my sin nature that I've discovered is pride and vanity. So I had a certain image of how I wanted things to look. And again, you know, taking
Mm.
cultural influences and what media says and, my own perspective of what I wanted something to happen, along with my family of origin and, how we developed and grew up. And image was a big thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
managing how
Mm-hmm.
everybody else perceived you was, I was, that was what I was pursuing. I mean, I was stellar at making sure that people saw me in the kind of light that I wanted to be perceived in, but yet that was so difficult because I couldn't actually honestly be myself. Because what if people really
Mm.
knew inside what was going on, the struggles that I
Yeah.
had, the fears that I had, the inability that I like? It was one of those things where you just be strong, you buckle up, never let them see you cry. I mean, it was the age that we grew up in and also the culture and my family. Like, so I had this in me, and so therefore I never brought up anything that would taint the image of
Oh.
that we weren't the perfect, couple, fiance, and then also into marriage. We were that couple where people would come to us and say, I don't know how you do it. You guys are so happy. He loves you so much. You guys are like, what's the secret to your marriage? It's amazing. And, arrogantly again, I would be like, oh, well, we're really good friends and we have date night and like all the regular things that you're supposed to do. But yet inside, I felt so almost misleading because I'm like, but if you really knew what I felt, and if you could see into my heart and the fear that I have, and how much I don't even know myself, and how I don't know him, and I don't really trust what we have, but we just kept feeding it out there. Um, it was
That must be
built on something that was
exhausting.
flimsy. Yes,
Yeah,
it
it must
was.
have been exhausting trying to like manage all of that too. I mean, the fear, but wow, that would have been exhausting,
Yeah, and just
I
some of
think.
the secrets that we both came into our marriage with that are normal things that you should have just talked about. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
he had a tremendous amount of debt, and I didn't really know that. And he went out and purchased some musical equipment. Fine, he's a musician, and that's normal. But that he kept it from me. Like it's just like normal things that you should be able to talk about were kept out of fear of
Mm.
what is she going to think, or it's going to cause um, problems or issues, or I'm embarrassed, or I can't talk about those things. So bringing in some debt, bringing in some and just some other things that he had done that I questioned him about. That he said, "Oh no, 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 like that never happened." And and my husband is I love him so much because he's tender and he's kind and he's a great listener and he's sensitive and he's charming and he's a musician and he's cute. So all of these things are very attractive, to women. I mean, I was attracted to that. Um, and so were many of his friends, work associates, people in his circle. And because he had these beautiful traits that were meant specifically for goodness, they get distorted. right? Especially if you have
Mm-hmm.
low self-esteem. My husband also has ADHD, which he didn't become aware of until his adult life. But that plays huge into the way you think about things, into the way that you handle things, about your risk, like your behaviors, your impulses. It's a tremendous thing to know about and then be able to have strategies to help you cope. But when you don't know
Mm,
about it, you just feel like you're
right.
weird and broken and stupid and dumb, and what's wrong with me, and all of this shame on top of it, because back in the 80s and 90s, who knew what ADHD was? It was just something that
Right. Yeah.
some kids had, that medicated and doped them up. That's not true. I mean, this is a
Right. Right.
neurotypical disorder, right? There are consequences and complications with it, but there's also so much beauty with it. So I'm telling you all of this just to give you
Right.
sort of a
Yeah.
background as to his personality and the things that he put out there. And then also without knowing. And I'll just really jump way
Mm,
ahead, but you know, when he finally did confess of his infidelity, and it was almost so it was so shocking to both of us, even though he made the choice. I mean, he knew what he was
mm.
doing. It wasn't it
And
wasn't
just
just
sorry, Stephanie. So how long were you married before this moment? Like the moment that the infidelity occurred. How many years into the marriage?
Right. Yeah. So he confessed of his affair August 25th, 2011. So we were 19 years into marriage. Three
So
kids
19
later.
years into marriage.
Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
again, shocking, like absolutely shocking. This wasn't supposed to be us. Infidelity worming its way into our marriage was not something that we signed up for. It's not what we hoped for. And again, no, I don't think honestly that anybody really determines when they're sharing their vows and looking into each other's eyes the day that they're getting married, that yeah, one day, if you're not meeting all my needs, or if I feel like I need something else, I'm just going to break all of these vows and go find pleasure and happiness somewhere else. I don't honestly think that people actually decide that then. And when I
Okay.
asked him, how did this happen and why did it happen, he was kind of just as shocked as I was. And his pain
Really?
was different than mine, very, very different than mine. But, here's the thing. He said, I didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I'd love to have an affair today. It's not like you go looking for it. But then I thought, well, what did you do to prevent it?
Right. So that's the question I was going to say. It's like if you're not looking for it, how does it still then happen?
Right. So, how do you protect yourself against it?
Mm-hmm.
And this was such a revelation for us to have this whole, like, we had this long discussion about it, because now we both help and support, other marriages. He speaks
Mm-hmm.
to guys groups. I speak to women about it. But that was such an important question that I asked him, and not one that is easy to ask. Is like, well, then, dude, what were you doing to protect yourself and me and our marriage
Mm.
against this when it's so possible? And the fact that anybody ever says, it's never going to happen to me, I would never do that. That right there is a recipe for disaster. I think as humans, we
Mm.
all need to recognize our weakness, our sin nature, our temptations, and say, I don't ever want it to happen, but certainly I'm capable of it. But with a plan in place and having accountability and saying, yeah, it's possible. I don't want it to happen, but of course it's possible. I'm not reserved for because I'm a Christian, or because I've been married for this long, or because I don't want it to happen, that it's not going to come across my pathway. It
So
can.
Stephanie, do you think that should have be honestly a conversation prior to getting married? Like you actually
Yeah.
sit there and go, here is a protection plan to ensure that we don't have an affair, or that we're not faced with infidelity. Like, I know that sounds so
Yeah.
crazy, but I've never had some pastor ever in premarital, you know, counseling ever say that. And by the way, P.S., here's the plan to ensure, or this is in front of you. Do you think it
Yeah.
should be like that?
I seriously do. I really, really do now looking back. And it's not like pastors are unaware of the fact that, or ministers or whoever's counseling you pre-marriage, that they haven't ever heard about, a couple or a marriage that has
Of course.
encountered infidelity. They do.
Right.
So being upfront, and again, this is the awkward and weird conversation, is just like, it's possible in your marriage. At some
Mm.
point, you might be faced with, because of the stress that's going on, because of kids, because of scheduling, because of all of the overwhelming factors that are part of marriage. You have a job. There are new people at your job. People are going to praise you. They're going to, give you accolades. They're going to become your friends. You might go out for dinners. You might have too much to drink. Somebody might be having a difficult time in their marriage. They might be broken. You might hear personal
Mm.
stories that you shouldn't really be hearing. How are you going to protect yourself, step away from it, and say, no, that's not for me? Because it feels like you're being unkind if somebody kind of not necessarily comes onto you, but starts sharing very personal, intimate details about their own marriage or
Mm-hmm.
their own brokenness, and you feel like compelled to either want to help or support them or come alongside. Suddenly that's a doorway into an emotional experience that shouldn't be shared necessarily by
Right.
a man and a woman, right? if you're
Right. So is
if you
that
find yourself consoling somebody else about their own personal marriage or relationships, and you're getting too close and too connected, and you find yourself
mm,
thinking about this person and wanting to help and support them from the goodness of your heart or because they're your friend, and yet
right?
feelings start to develop, you need to be aware of that right away. And I said to my husband, like, at the point where you sort of felt like you were crossing the line, shouldn't you have come to me first and said, hey, hun, listen, this is a really weird and awkward and hard conversation for me to have, but I think that I have feelings for another woman, and I don't want it to get in the way of our marriage. So I want to have a conversation, or I think we should consult our pastor or go to a counselor or something. Like, that's a brave conversation. Not that many people are willing to do
I
that
was about to
because of,
say I don't think a lot of people would do it, and
no,
maybe there's reasons, Stephanie. Either they don't feel safe with their spouse, which is a whole other issue. Like if you don't feel safe with your spouse to say that, then there's a problem there. And also, I think it is for yourself because a lot of people would say, "Oh, I don't want my spouse to think of me that way." But if you have a healthy marriage, then that's a really important conversation to have before anything happens. I mean, so my question then, Stephanie, is that what happened with your husband when he started the affair? Was it an innocent conversation like that with someone? Is that how it
yeah.
was opened up? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was, and
Yeah.
that's our experience. So I'm not saying every affair starts that way, and I'm not saying that
Right.
every marriage is going to encounter it the same way. I mean, we're all different people, different personalities, and different sensitivities. But that was how theirs started, and to be honest, there were some red flags, and I should have been more courageous to confront that right at the get-go. But
Mm.
in the past, we did experience something like that, 10 years earlier. And I did confront him. I gathered up the courage, and I thought I was going to vomit when I said, listen, I think something weird is going on. You're acting strange. There's behaviors in you that are not normal. Your hours are really weird. You're working a lot. I'm smelling perfume. Like, there were just so many signs. And so I finally got the courage up, and I thought, well, we know each other. We trust each other. We'll work this out, all of that sort of thing. And I confronted him with it, and bold face, blatant lie. honey, nothing is going on. I love you. Nothing is going on. Please trust me. So what are you supposed to do as a wife who wants to trust and
Mm.
yet feels this discord, right? There's tension inside. There's like something is not right, but yet if I continue to nag or bug him or bring it up, then who am I? I must be a horrible wife. I have to be able to trust him. If I don't trust him, then what do we have? And so I kind of bought into that lie. Um, and I'm backtracking a little bit, but
Yeah.
this did happen earlier on in our marriage where there was an emotional connection, and he wasn't forthcoming, right? So there were some half truths, just
Okay.
enough to be able to feel like I can alleviate the guilt in myself and say, well, yes, I am becoming closer with a work colleague, but she's going through something and she really needs my help, and I'm the only one. And I'm like, okay, well, I know you're a nice guy and you're very kind, and this is part of who you are. That's part of why I love you. You're sensitive, and yeah, I mean, sure, you should go and help. No.
Hmm. No.
So I struggled for about a year thinking I was just a terrible person who didn't trust, who had real issues, but yet remember my own arrogance and my own upbringing and my own like definition or identity is I'm a strong person. I can handle this myself. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anybody's help. We don't need
And
to
you didn't
bring this
tell
to
anybody?
counseling.
You didn't tell anybody?
Nope, nobody. Not even my best friends. Where, see, I think that
Mm,
that's the
wow.
thing. When we hold ourselves in the darkness of secrecy and we're trying to battle all of it ourselves,
Mm.
we are going to fail. We are going to basically, in the interior, we just shove it all down to the basement. Why would I bring this up? That's not necessary. It's just going to make things worse. We bring it down to the basement. What does
Mm-hmm.
it do? It just goes there and lifts weights. It gets stronger. So I already started building this resentment and bitterness and mistrust. And so we were slowly drifting and slowly dividing. And then there was a bit of a shift and something happened and bought a new house, moved to a new neighborhood, and everything seemed great again. We didn't have to talk about it. Oh, it's
Mm.
done. It's in the past. Let's just move on. Let's just move forward. Let's not go back. I don't think
Right.
we can move forward until we do go back and resolve any kind of issue that we are curious about, that didn't sit well with us, that really has now tainted a portion of our intimacy. And so it was already there. The seed was already there. And because we didn't
Stephanie,
actually confront it,
yeah, do you think too, when you say that, even speaking for myself when I'm thinking back to my first marriage and a lot of people listening, it's probably a point where it's like, oh, it's just too much work to go back. Right? Like, let's just band-aid the problem by
yeah,
a new house, some good renos, moving forward, new things, and let's not worry about that because that's so much work. And I just
another kid.
emotionally, yeah, right? And it's
Oh, yeah,
emotionally, I just can't go there. You can't go there, so let's just go forward. And I wonder how many marriages are like that. It's just it's too much
plenty.
work from the past, and now we're just gonna keep going, and then shove down to the basement, shove aside because that's going to take us months, maybe years of work to unravel, unpack all that stuff. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like I'm thinking about that going,
so
oh
many.
man, oh man, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it does. And here's the thing, it's a slow, slow drift. It is a
Yes.
slow descension on that slippery
Hmm.
slope, right? And what you don't take care of in the moment will only progress. If it's important, it's only progressing and it's getting bigger and it's snowballing. And whether or not it's experienced externally, it's definitely felt internally, and it does take over so many areas of your life. Other relationships suffer because of it. Just the health and wellness of your own emotional,
Mm-hmm.
spiritual, physical well-being gets defective. And and so now looking back, like it was just a matter of time. Right? It's just a matter of time before
Mm.
it actually happened fully, because of playing around with the fire and noticing, in my husband's experience, noticing the sort of lift that he got when he was around, other people who would stroke his self-esteem, or would tell him that, he was great. And although I definitely complimented my husband, I used a lot of tactics to kind of keep him down and disrespect him, because I felt like that helped control our relationship. That felt like I had power, and it was misused, and
Oh,
it wasn't
wow.
fair. But I did things but he didn't have a voice. I didn't let him have a voice. I mean, we can know our love languages, which is awesome. Like his is physical touch
Hmm.
and quality time, and mine's acts of service and words of affirmation. We can know our love languages really well, but we did not know our fight language, nor did we allow ourselves to be able to have a fight language so that we could resolve conflicts of tension, emotional strife, physical, like the way that we parented, or the way that we kept the house, or the way that we just communicated, or what we,
Mm.
the roles in the family, like all of those things, financial aspects of it. If we weren't coming into truth and transparency in all of those areas of our marriage, then of course we were ripe. We were fertile
That
ground
makes
for
sense.
something
Yeah.
else to come in and disrupt and take us like away. And that. Hmm.
Yeah. So this makes sense. You set this up, quite honestly and beautifully in the way of I'm seeing the next step, right? Like you're setting it all up, Stephanie, and he then, chooses to then have this affair. Uh, and again, he's not here to speak about that and what he felt and all that. So, for you, for your side of the story, he has this affair. How long did the affair go on until he finally came to confess to you?
3 months.
So it was 3 months, and you had no idea at all, or did you have any inkling? No idea.
No.
You had no idea. And what would he say, your husband, through that 3 months? I mean, going through it, is there guilt? Was there this euphoria of like it's secretive, it's fun? Like what's happening on his side? So you don't know, and he's going 3 months having this affair behind your back, obviously.
Hmm.
Can you speak for him in that? Like what was he? What's going on there with him?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
Everything that you said,
Thank you, thank you, thank
and
you.
and
Okay.
yes. Just so that we, we're all. This is very transparent. He knows I'm having this
Right.
interview today.
Right.
Anytime
Okay.
that we talk about, infidelity in our situation, we discuss it with each other first. So I am
That's
not
good.
saying anything that he is not aware of.
Okay.
And he
That's
does.
good.
I do have permission to share, but I don't want to share like his part of the story. But of course, those are questions that I asked. How did you feel while you were doing this? I mean, how did you give yourself permission to blatantly lie and to tell me that you were going somewhere when you weren't? And all of the. So when you're in an affair, it's in in my mind, it seemed like he was off having like the time of his life. It was so exciting and so beautiful and freeing, and he got to do his thing, and it was pleasurable and all that. And he's like, if that's the story you're making up, I can assure you it was not like that. Of course, there were
Mm.
moments of excitement, but they were very rapidly. Um, the next thought or feeling was fear of being found out, guilt and shame of doing something that is not like him, but being compelled and stuck in it, like he couldn't get out. It was overly stressed. Work was terrible situation for him. Trying to manage and deal with the family was terrible. He avoided being around us. He hated that because he loves his kids and likes to be family and loves being a husband. And yet he felt that obviously, he was in this duplicitous place, which felt so terrible, yet also had the intrigue and there was arousal, and there was deception, which can be very pleasurable and exciting. And also for somebody with ADHD, you have a dopamine rush, and that's what your brain needs because you're deficient in dopamine. So anything that causes a heightened sense of awareness, a heightened sense of like feeling alive and feeling that helped him to feel sort of known and understood, and a sense of belonging and a sense of self-esteem and all this kind of higher level self was coming out of that, but it was in the shadows. It was like it was in the dark. So even though the experience was all of these kind of wonderful feelings, they were masked by, but it's wrong. It's just wrong, which is why, it wasn't in the light. He didn't come forward and say, hey, guess what? I'm doing this. They, most of the time was just them managing, keeping it secret, and then worrying about, being found out. And because it was in the church, they're both on the worship team. And so I had to, try to manage God. Where are you in all of this? Like when he finally confessed, and it wasn't, I would love to say that, he just came to the end of himself and said, this is not right. I gotta just suck it up and confess and be honest and let the consequences, you know, lay where they may. But it wasn't like that. It was, they were caught and they were told, you have to. You have to, at the same time, um, tell your wife, tell your husband. Um, and then can I continue with sort of how the church responded?
So just wait one
Yeah.
second. So they were caught, and then so if they weren't caught, do you believe it would have gone on longer?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because it was so enmeshed. It was so difficult for them. As he said to me, they tried a couple of different times to, like, that's it, we're done. This is unsustainable. We can't continue. We're not looking to, break up our marriages and run away together. That wasn't the point. But I think, chemicals that are released during intimate relationships, and this is pure science as well as scriptural, we bond. Like the two shall become one. We bond. There are chemical releases of oxytocin and serotonin, and these are very, very strong, natural drugs that connect us and almost tell us, like, I can't survive without this in my life, whatever that is. It could be, whatever addiction it is. And for him anyway, it was a physical addiction. Um, that when we went to counseling, we realized that early exposure to pornography was part of the problem, and keeping that secretive, but
Wow.
having this heightened arousal around, pleasurable images and sex and what it does and the power of that. So that's one of the things that kind of kept them there. So I do, and he does think as well, it would have been hard for them. Eventually, the plan was, it's going to end and we'll just take it to our graves. That was the plan. And to me, that's heartbreaking because how can you live the rest of your life with this deep, dark secret? Something that's so, it's not just a little white lie. It's a big, heavy duty black lie. And to decide and determine that you were going to take it to your grave, that's just that blocks all intimacy and trust issues. And then, you're susceptible for it to happen again. Again, let's go back to, like, how do you protect yourself against it? You have to talk about it. So in my mind, I got this huge revelation from God while I was, praying, like, Lord, how does this happen in the church? Why didn't you strike them down? How did you allow it to go on? Like, didn't you care that, how could they preach? How could they worship? How could they lead a team? How could they be like all of these things while this terrible sin is going on in the background? Like, Saturday night together, Sunday morning at church. Like, what? The hypocrisy was driving me crazy. Like I had some good old chats with God, like, this is not right. How do you let this happen if you're in control? Why did you, first of all, let it happen and allow it to happen and continue. And I really feel, Melinda, like God gave me this vision of like just two big, huge, bright lights. It was just like, because there were many times that they had the opportunity to get out and they didn't take it, right? Like scripture says, like, hey, you could choose the path of sin, but there are many options to get out. God gives you many opportunities to get out, to confess it, to clean up your act, to be able to resolve it, to have restoration. And yet they didn't. And I feel like these two big God lights just came on and went, you and you, that's it, you're out. Because you're way too important in my kingdom. I'm not going to let this continue to happen.
Mm.
And that revelation to me just gave me it gave me the confidence to be able to say, I think this was meant for something way bigger than just pain in our lives and something that we had to get through. We're going to use this pain and this situation as part of our ministry, to be able to help others.
Well, and,
First of
and
all,
Stephanie, that's what I was going to
ourselves.
ask you, because I think in that I was going to ask you, because there's probably people listening going, and you stayed with him, like I think that's sort of the next step of this story. It's like, I think just you able to share and your husband able to share so honestly and courageously about your marriage and story and the affair. But I think for many,
Mhm.
it's like at that point, it's justification, quote unquote, to leave, to be like, I'm out. And
For
yet
sure.
you stayed. You stayed. You both
Yeah.
stayed. I mean, you both stayed within
Yeah.
this. So I think that's the next, kind of topic here on, when we're talking about summer of strength and strengthening. It's like,
Hmm.
what and how and why did you choose to stay?
Yeah.
After that deception, and how do you stay when there is a sense of like you abandoned me and you made this choice against me and our family,
Hmm.
and yet choosing to stay and build trust and restoration and forgiveness. That's huge.
Yes. Yeah. So early on, um, someone told me, you get to stay and be part of his redemptive process. That was
Wow.
powerful to me. And yet at the same time, I thought, I didn't choose this pathway. This is so unfair. This is so unfair that now that he's confessed and was willing to do all the things to fight and to make it right, and he had sincere remorse, to which I've never seen another human being express,
Mm.
to the point of like, uncontrollable sobbing and immense regret and willingness to really do all of the things. And he took personal responsibility, never ever blaming me, never pointing the finger, never saying, well, because you did or you didn't do or you were like, and that's what choice did I have? You sort of forced me. I was looking for that. I would come to him with everything like, what did I do wrong? Was it this? Was it this? Was it this? Because I wanted to be able to fix the thing that I did to cause him so that I didn't have to worry about it happening again. Because if I could control, who I was and what I did, and know if I don't do that ever again, it's never going to happen. And I was a little bit perturbed that he kept taking all the responsibility. And I'm like, no, but if you do that, then, what can I do in order to protect myself and to protect our marriage from this happening again? And that was a whole, that was my own journey, which I'm really glad to have gone on, but it was difficult because now we needed help. So let's go back to like when we didn't need any
Mm-hmm.
help because we were the perfect marriage and perfect thing. And why would we need help? And in fact, to be
Right.
honest with you, he grabbed my hand in church 10 days before their affair started. And our pastor was talking about an upcoming marriage retreat and marriage course and all that. He grabbed my hand, looked down at me, and he says, our marriage is so great, we could teach that course.
Oh.
10 days. And then he entered into an affair. Who says that? And I truly believe that he believed that. But yet, again, it was part of our arrogance of not being willing to ask for help and to talk about the real things that were going on below the surface. So he confessed. I it was just like a regular Thursday. August 25th, youth group just left my house. He was at band practice. He came home. I poured a glass of wine. I was like, woohoo, date night. Kids are all at camp. Let's like have date night. He's like, uh, no. And I knew in an instant something was terribly wrong. And three
Wow.
thoughts flashed through my mind because his mom had been really sick. And so it was like either his mom died, he's having an affair, or he lost his job. And so it was like, I didn't even give him time to answer. I'm like, is it your mom? No. You're having an affair? Yes.
Oh.
What? And I just come back from Shoppers Drug Mart, so I had like Tide in my hand and a carton of milk, and I whipped it at him so hard, and lots of profanity and lots of anger. I didn't know I had so much rage in me, but I do. And I just broke every wedding picture. I threw it at him. I yelled. I screamed. Everything. And then I thought in my mind, in my logical self, should I go? It was midnight. I'm like, should I go somewhere? I'm going to go to my friend's house. I'm like, well, what am I going to do when I get there? And then also because I'll have to jockey his car out and then take mine out and then put his back in. And like all of these like stupid things, like, what am I doing? Like, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to bed. And laundry was on our bed. And so we both went upstairs and we folded laundry like a normal thing after just delivering this massive devastating news where my heart was shattered, but I was in so much shock and so numb that I was like, no, I don't really think that this is what's happening. Like, it's something different, right? So you start to the grieving process about bargaining and like this is all going on in my mind. I fold the laundry, put it away. He's exhausted. He goes to sleep. And I'm like, really, dude, you can do this? How do you do that? Like, this is the most disruptive thing I've ever experienced, we've ever experienced. And you're sleeping. But he was terribly exhausted from all the stress over the last 3 months. And so the next morning, I didn't sleep at all. I picked up my phone, what to do after, when you realize you're having an affair, or what to do after an affair. And I was like, I'm looking this up. I'm looking this up. Who is going to believe this? This is terrible. So our pastor came over the next morning. We sat with him, had a pot of coffee. He handed us a card and said, I really encourage you guys to go for counseling. And I'm like, oh, counseling is for weak people. Counseling is for people who can't do it on their own. Counseling and therapy is for people who have problems and issues. Wow, that's us. That's us. How
There it
dare
is.
I? Right there.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he said, I'm willing to do everything and anything. And I'm like, okay. And it was honestly the scariest moment of my life was to cross over the threshold of a counselor's office. I'm like, oh, what if somebody sees us here? It was like the moment in Ashley's, right? What if somebody sees
Yeah.
us here? I'm like, what if somebody sees us in counseling? Something's wrong. Yeah. And we're doing something about it. That's what he said to me. We're doing something about it. Yay, us. How brave. And I'm like, oh, okay. So suddenly, he's becoming this guy, and I think he really just wanted it all out. Like once the vomit starts, you want it all out. Like, as you're retching, you're just like, just get it
Mm-hmm.
all out. I want it all out because I want to be able to understand why this happened, how it happened, and how we can prevent it, or at least make a plan for what's going to happen next. So we did. We diligently went twice a week. We were in counseling for 2 years. So if people want to know what to do, you get really honest about it. You go to counseling. You bring all of your honesty there. You mediate, you yell, you scream, you talk about it. If you're a person of faith, engage your pastor or your minister or your
Mm-hmm.
rabbi. Bring that component into it, do things together, pray for each other. We never prayed for each other. We would say grace, at dinner, and we would pray for the kids, but we never prayed over each other, with each other, for each other. We cried together. We hugged each other. We yelled and we screamed. We actually had conflict. We stayed in the pain of the conflict until we could work it out. We got tools from our counselor about how to fight properly. We went to recovery. We went to a recovery group. He was there for 4 months and was learning all kinds of things about himself. He came home one night and he's like, do you know what codependency means? I'm like, I think so. He goes, well, I'm codependent. And he had this list. He's like, I checked off every box on this list. Who knew? It was like he was so excited to be learning about himself and to bring it to me. And I was just delighted that he was sharing these intimate parts about himself and not afraid. Because the joy of discovering who you are and the curiosity and the confidence and the strength that you're
Mm.
building in yourself when you're doing these things, it's kind of like, you know what? I want us to stay together. I believe we're supposed to stay together. I believe that we're going to be stronger for it and that this is God's plan for us. But, hun, if you need to leave, I'm not going to keep you here
Right.
because I'm
So, Stephanie, do
learning
you think
how
that
important.
many marriages that have broken down because of an affair could have been actually saved and salvaged if, I mean, I guess there's many reasons, right? I mean, because there's some people who are just like, my spouse didn't really want to work on it. Like, this was their way of getting out.
Yeah.
And then there's some
Yeah.
who are like, if we actually had just turned to each other and said, I'd work on it versus reacting, we probably would have stayed together. I mean, I know there's many
I've heard
stories,
both.
but I've heard
Yep.
both. Yeah, I have too.
I've
I have
heard
too.
both. And I think ours, and believe me, ours wasn't like, okay, day one, let's do all the things to keep us together. And we just kept, it wasn't a trajectory like this. It wasn't a pretty line up. It was
Right, right.
at least three major times. I was like, that's it. I'm out. I don't care. I want a divorce. And I also felt, but then there was the shame of that, right? Because he was willing to do the work and he was being open and honest and he was changing. And then if I was the one who said, you know what, I can't handle this. This pain is too much because the thoughts are relentless. The intrusive thoughts, the images, the disgust, like
Mm.
all of it. It was like second after second after second. I remember honestly having like one period of time where it was about 15 minutes where I didn't think about it for 15 minutes, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about it. And I was so delighted that I had gone 15 minutes without a thought about it. And that
Mm.
was like the first time that I recognized, okay, I think we can progress. But my shame was now, okay, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, when I was like, that's it, I can't, I'm out. I'm out. Even after doing all of this work, I wanted out. But then I thought, oh, great. So now I'm the bad guy, right? I'm going to break our
Mm.
family. I'm going to wreck our kids because he's doing all the things. I'm going to be seen now as the bad guy, as the villain, the one who, left her family and left her marriage after he was trying so hard to do all the things. And he made new promises um, and actually, can I tell you this? Because this is such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful restorative act that my husband did. He did so many brave things. Like, you want to know like how he gained back and earned back trust. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I did not trust him, and rightfully so. He needed to earn it back. It didn't mean that I didn't love him or that I wasn't willing to do the work, but I didn't have to just trust him in order to forgive him. Even I could forgive him and still not trust him because I had absolute reason to not trust because I had been fooled so badly. But in
Right.
part of the restoration process, um, and to cover over a really ugly date, the date that their affair started, which by the way was my birthday. Yay.
Oh.
And so now I thought, oh,
Oh.
great. Now I have this anniversary that, I can't even celebrate. But he totally restored that. We had gone to Florida for my sister's wedding, and it was on the long weekend, which was my birthday weekend, and her wedding was the day before. So that was kind of an interesting mess, but and beautiful at the same. It was brutal, but after the
Beautiful. I like that.
wedding, it
Mm.
was actually, I think it's a Glennon Doyle thing, so I don't want to take it.
Okay.
But after the wedding, we were in Clearwater, and the kids were, in their hotel room, and he said, let's go for a walk. It's your birthday. Let's go for a walk on the beach. I'm like, dude, it's 12:30, at night. And he's like, no, I just really want to go. I just want to be with you. And he held my hand, and he got down on one knee. And gosh, it was so long ago, but it's still so emotional. And he had a new gold ring made with 10 diamonds in it because we were coming up to our 20th year anniversary. And he got down on one knee and he handed me the box and he said, I didn't do this right the first time. I've made some terrible mistakes. I wasn't the husband I should have been. I wasn't the husband I wanted to be. And I wasn't the husband you deserved. And I love you so much. Will you marry me? And
Wow.
I said yes. And interesting, we did celebrate our 20th year anniversary with a vow renewal in front of 100 friends and our family, most of whom knew our situation, our story. But in year one of our marriage, God gave me this vision that we were going to renew our vows on our 20th anniversary. And I shared that with my husband. I'm like, you know what? We're going to have a big party. It's going to be so great. When it's our 20th year anniversary, we're going to renew our vows. And he's like, okay, whatever. It's year one for him. He's like, especially if you have ADHD, there's like 2 times now and not now, right? It's like, that's not now.
Right.
So I'm not good. Sure, hon, whatever you like. Yeah, that sounds great. And that our marriage would be so broken and fall apart in the 19th year was such a God story of like, you can do this. You're going to have a lot of resilience and a lot of determination and a lot of rebuilding, but I'm here right with you. And that was how my faith grew. That was how I learned about myself, about the things I needed to let go of. And we actually had that 20th year vow renewal anniversary. It was the most beautiful thing. It wasn't a big party and the big fantasy that I dreamed about, 19 years earlier, but it was truthful, it was honest, it was beautiful, it was intimate. It was just the most glorious thing, and surrounded by our family and friends who embraced us and encouraged us along the way. And that was one of the elements, honestly, Melinda, that within the church, our church never gave us, or at least we didn't perceive it to ever be a shameful thing. They were rooting for us and the other family to restore, to reconcile, to stay together, to be, to have a strengthened marriage. We were welcomed back. We decided to leave because it was just a weird situation. I didn't want to go back there where they were, and but it wasn't like we were told we had to leave. We were given, elders in our church to pray over us, to be with us, to keep accountable to be there for us at 1 a.m. People came and delivered food to us. They offered to babysit our kids, to give us time away. Anything we needed, they were right there for us, with so much encouragement, so much love, so much mercy, so much grace. That started me to understand just what forgiveness and compassion and community looked like. And then I started to love it and embrace it and ask for help, and was willing to, say yes to the food instead of like, I can do it. Well, I don't need your help. Thank you very much. I was like, yeah, you know what? Come and look after the kids. We need some time away, or I need some time away. And I never really felt, shame placed on us right away after, he confessed, and, there was a meeting of the elders, and then both of them had to, make an apology to the worship team. And so all the, like, it was so strategic and so built in mercy, and like we had such a safety net in which to fall into, that it could only have been God ordained. And I'm so truly grateful for that experience, because I know some people don't have that same experience. And I think the church community really is a place, it's a hospital for broken souls, for people who are going through hard things. It's not a palace for perfect posers, and if it is, get out of that church. That's what I would really advise people. Do not do that. If you feel like if you brought your worst sin, to the leadership team or to others, and they shunned you for it, get out of that church. That is not the message of Jesus. That is not God's heart. We are all capable of really terrible sins, and yet having compassion and the ability or desire to forgive, even when it's so hurtful. And I wanted to keep bringing it up to my husband, because I wanted to like shove his face into the pain of what I was feeling, until I realized it's not helping. Like he's not even dealing with it the same way that I am. so my understanding of forgiveness, which I did right away, by the way, because it was like, oh, well, God tells me I have to forgive. So if I'm not, you
Mm-hmm.
know, what kind of a Christian am I if I don't forgive right away? Because of course I've made mistakes, and I forgive you, I forgive her, done,
Yeah.
right? Like it was like, okay, what's next? And it doesn't work like that. It is such a process. Every time new information came up, or I would discover something, or I would be hurt over and over again, I was like, well, that piece needs to be forgiven. I need to go through the process of grieving that piece of it. So I went through the shock, and I went through the bargaining, I went through the anger, and I went through the sadness in order to get to the acceptance of it. And it wasn't a one and done. It was so many layers, so many different things. Every time I'd ask a question, he was honest and like, ugh, I got to forgive that part of it. And it was exhausting. Like it truly is a difficult time that you need to have self-compassion too, and not feel like you have to continue to do all the things. Thankfully, I had a boss who understood, because I went to her and said, this is what's going on. The HR department at my company said, you know what, take the time that you need. This is grief. You're going through
Yeah.
loss of a marriage I thought I had. We were trying to put it back together, and it's exhausting if you don't have the support system, the scaffolding. If you haven't invited that into your life, you will flail. It'll be
Right.
so much
And
more
Stephanie, I
difficult.
think, yeah, and I think those are key things as we wrap up our conversation. I think there's so many parts of this story. It's an incredible story of how you made it through. And I think there's so much about the honesty and the hard work and the community and the church. And I really think, I mean, with your husband, if he wasn't willing to put the work in, uh, I don't think this marriage would have happened. And 20 years later, here you are. But I think, if you were going to just sort of, as we wrap it up, give sort of maybe 3 points of how to ensure, for our listeners, that they're strengthened as they struggle through a marriage, or if they're in a place where you were and are like, my husband, my wife, my partner has had an affair. What would be sort of the top 3 things you would say that you must do to kind of get through this moment?
Yeah.
I know it's only 3. It's hard, but I mean, and you've said a lot in that. There's a lot of points, but what would you say your top 3
Mhm.
would be?
Yeah, I think number one, having the willingness to invite others into your restoration process.
That's good. Yeah.
Be able to, be transparent with yourself, with your spouse, and with the people who are coming alongside to help you. The other thing that I would truly recommend is make sure you surround yourself with people who are supporting you in the way you want to go. Because
Mm.
I could have found a lot of people who would say, you know what, you have every right to leave the son of a gun. Like, why are you with him? And I could have surrounded myself with those types of people, and they would have influenced my decision. But right away, we decided we were only going to share our story and be with people who were supportive of our decision, which was trying to stay together. And so those were as soon as somebody was like, you know what I would do, and it wasn't in line with what we wanted, I'd say, thank you so much for your opinion. I trust that that's something that, you really believe in, but that's not what we want. That's not where we're going. So only surround yourself with people who are lining up to the vision you have for your life and for your marriage. And the other thing I would say is, even even before this happens, if there are red flags, to be courageous enough to have that conversation, and to do it from I and me statements, not in an offensive, shaming, blaming way of pointing a finger going, when you do this and you do that and I and you, because that just triggers us to get defensive and to try to protect ourselves. But instead, to
Right.
come humility is a really big ingredient to a successful marriage. but to say, hey, I'm struggling with something and here's what it is. And it's really hard for me to have this conversation because I don't want to upset you and I don't feel like I want to do it and I'm really nervous, but I've sensed something in myself or in you. I
Mm.
I feel like, you know what? I'm disconnecting from you in an emotional way. And I actually am starting to share some of my personal life with my guy friend or, with my
Right.
female at work. And I
Yeah.
don't want it to lead to anything. Therefore, I'm sharing it with you, hun, because I want to bring us into it together so that we can manage this together. And I'm not saying it because I want you to get worried or upset, but I want you
Mm-hmm.
to be able to know what I'm dealing with. I would say that would be honestly number one. And I think if we
That's
had
good.
done that
Yeah.
with many things in our life, we probably wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. But we are, like
Right.
I can't continue to say why me, why me, why me. It's like, oh, why not me?
Right.
God, how are you
Yeah.
using this?
Yeah. The transparency. That's good. Well, Stephanie Rourke Jackson, thank you so much. That was a tremendous story and so much that I learned, and I took lots of notes.
Oh,
And I think
well,
for our listeners too, yeah, I think for our listeners too, that it's really helpful. And I think in so many areas, whether you're in it or you're out or you're starting, you had some really great things to just help us, to strengthen us, to encourage us in our journey. So thanks so much for being with us here on See Here Love. Is so appreciated you being a part of our series of SOS Summer of Strength, and I know that your story has strengthened so many who have listened today. So thanks for being with us.
thank you so much for having me.